introduce myself. Hey, good afternoon. I'll try to keep you awake for this first half hour. Again, I'm with the U.S. Coast Guard's Research and Development Center. I'm out of New London, Connecticut. So that's why I said I think I might have come just a tiny bit further than Jacqui did say. A lot of this work you're hearing about, some of it's mine, but a lot of it is, a lot of times I go to these things and people have talked about how many spills they've been to. Well, I've been to one spill. I spent a bunch of time down in Deepwater at Homa. But I've been to the facility, if you've never heard of it, called OMSET, Oil Spill Test Facility outside of New Jersey. Cumulatively over the past 20 years, I probably spent over half a year there, maybe a little bit. So it took 26, 27 weeks, dumping things in the water, cleaning them up, and then trying them again. So we're going to talk a little bit about in the water column now. Part of it is you're going to hear a lot of repetition. As somebody said, number one, there hasn't been that many spills. We haven't done that much research. And it's the same group of people doing a lot of the same stuff. So I'm still going to talk a little bit about finding the problem and potential response, going backtracking a little bit about detection, and then going into mitigation. And special thanks to people Steve Lehman, Alex Paulsley is my compatriot, and USGS who slides I shamefully stole. So the first question is if it's in the water column, who cares? Do you care? How much do you care? And the first, you've seen a couple of these pictures, and on the right there's the droplets. This is pictures from the Berman again. So again, you know it's there, you know there's pieces there. You care about that. The next thing is whether it's dispersed, whether it be chemically dispersed or droplets are becoming dissolved in the water column. So now you're talking at molecular level. We know some fluorometers work better this way. Other systems that you're doing are going to work better finding things that way. So does it matter? Somebody has to make a decision of how do we care and how much do we care about how much we have to stop and what are we willing to do with. So just to give you a feel, we talked about the Enbridge spill. What they ended up doing, it took them years by the time they went back and tracked the stuff happening in the rivers. So for those who don't know, they actually went back and spent about a year and a half developing a model. When you talk about a model, we're talking about flying LiDAR airplanes over it, getting bathymetry to within inches, getting depths, getting heights above water, modeling it to the nth degree. So then they can come up with velocities to determine, again, as you go down the river, this goes measured velocity versus this model velocity, just to give you a feel. But we're talking miles of river, and they talked about, okay, if we see that plunger go down those poles and something pops up, is that a good sign or a bad sign? Should we do something at that location or not? So they came up with a total suspended solids from mile 0 to mile 40, sorry. Okay, just kills it. So this is their sort of final thing that says total suspended solids from mile 0 all the way to mile 40 and figured out where it should have ended up. Now this is, again, we're talking years after the spill happened. Now they can go back and do more sampling. Now they can go back and try to figure out, did it really end up there or not? They've done some high testing, and then when they decide to do the major excavations back down to the dam court, that's where they found it. At least that part was right, but along the way. So, sorry. So then you have to decide, you saw this picture before, if you're inshore, you have one set of parameters. If you're offshore, you want to try to recover it here. Can you, or do you try to recover it here? Or do you try to force it up? We'll talk a little bit, one slide briefly about people trying to force it up. So again, these have already been mentioned. Whether you're having the crab traps, they actually did briefly put a silk fence out on the DBL 152. Again, it worked very well. And then this anchored snare. I'll mention a little bit some research being done there. So what we wanted to try to do, again, is going back and trying the testing. And I'll emphasize this again and again. It's really hard to test. And there's two reasons. If you're trying to create bubbles in the water column or droplets in the water column, it's really difficult to create that. You usually have to have some dispersants or something. And then even then, the difference here is at OMSET, and most other facilities, you don't have moving water. So the same kind of physics that you would keep the oil suspended in the column, you don't really have it here. So you're trying to keep them down now while you're moving the instrumentation through. So the instrumentation is doing the moving rather than the water column doing the moving. So it becomes a little difficult. But we did find ways to get create some bubbles, and you can see these plumes in a small tank on the left and in a main tank in the OMSET on the right. It's about 8.5 feet deep, but we can create some of these things. They don't stay down very long. So the first thing we did was take a radar. We talked a sonar we talked a little bit about that. So again, the only difference is no plume for the plume. So it's still Again, Jacqui shows one. This is 5 or 6 years old now, so a little more better quantification. So what is that? We couldn't get a really good feel of what's the real criteria for concentration that'll let you get that. Again, if you have more sediment, if you have more air, you can get a higher signal. Assuming that oil's with it, you have a better chance. The other thing we tried is some more fancier fluorescence. Again, some of the stuff that wet labs and a couple of other companies are already doing, multispectral. Catch these at multi-levels and not just always at one. Because again, that's also, you don't want to do a false alarms. As you may not know, some of the critters that they were talking about before, they also fluoresce. So if you hit them with the same signal, it's going to get something off. If you're not interpreting them correctly, you could think that's oil, but no, that's because it has carbon in it, that's going to fluoresce and give you a message back. Make sure which one you're looking at. But we did be able to talk about, depending upon the ratio, grabbing some of the stuff a little bit better, depending upon the crude. Again, this is developmental. Again, it's not off the shelf yet. Jacqui did mention the multi-angles system, basically trying to take advantage of how different particles scatter light. So an oil droplet is going to scatter light different than an air particle bubble. It's going to scatter different than a piece of silt. Can we do that? The problem is I don't know how you could see. What we did is a list was a system that you could measure the distribution of particles. It was sitting right here. The rest of the system was up here. We never got these to correlate perfectly because we're not sure if they were in the same plume at the same time measuring the same thing. And again, that's a problem you have at onset. So you're creating this wave, but you're moving the system through a stationary plume. So you don't quite get what you are actually being exposed to out in the real world if you really do have a current moving through. So we did some good concentrations and we had some ideas. We weren't able to hardly confirm positively that this works every single time. Still needs more work, but we didn't have any more money. And so then we said, okay, we got a couple ideas, maybe a little bit better, maybe not so hot. But now how do we mitigate? So if you're going to try to put a system together, you don't have to read through these all, but you know what all can you mitigate? What are the people have already mentioned? What are the environmental impacts of that of you mitigating? How can you use it? How can you get it there? Can you operate it in pressure salt water if you're observing? So again, the problem is test setup. The equipment moves through the water versus the oil moving to the systems. So the first one is just some fancy sorbents. Argonne National Labs came up with a system. Some of you might have seen some multiple press releases. They did this about the greatest things in sliced bread is where you really almost what their press release says. What they did is they came up with a proprietary process that takes the same regular sorbents and just enhances them. And they showed that in quiescent water, in fresh water, you can get up to 40 to 1 in recovery efficiencies. Again, fresh water, quiescent water. Small samples. We then took this to offset. The idea again being is you would put this on some kind of a fishnet type system, which is also problematic. A lot of people came up with these kind of systems during Deepwater Horizon. Any ideas of what the biggest problem with that system is? Sorry?
You're catching fish.
Exactly. You're going to catch everything in there. Turtles, fish, anything that's out there you're going to grab. So again, I'll mention another one in a little bit. In theory, yes. So we ended up putting a panel that we said with the different sorbent squares and basically creating a plume in front of it and driving it through. And then the whole idea was you squeeze it out and reuse it. So even in this system, again, I'll talk about the data in a minute, when they're in the lab space, when they do process this sorbent with their proprietary thing, it does recover oil and can be reused better than all the other sorbents that they have out there that we can measure against. So at least that part appears to have some promise. But I don't expect to see these numbers. We ended up with about 11 tests, but the percent oil collected was only about 12 to 1% literally. So the numbers did not come up. Now, the company thinks it's purely physics. Again, driving the system through the water. We're not sure. We're not convinced that that's just the only answer. There's some issues here as well. The system that we sort of got together is people have talked about using air bubbles to try to bring things to the surface. Most of the time, the designs are a pipe with the same size hole all the way through. So again, you're sort of stuck with the size of the hole, the energy you have, that gives you the final distribution of, say, a wall of air. These guys are doing a company called Dynaflow, was actually trying a combination of cavitation and other pressures. So you actually get a little bigger distribution from 2 to 100, depending upon what you have. So again, the idea is rather than just having one size bubble now, you can create multiple size bubbles. And again, in theory, it should work a little better. They developed a generator system and did the same kind of thing. You can see this being coming up, it's sitting on the bottom of the onset tank, and the oil as they're approaching it. And at the surface, you see some of this stuff coming up, maybe not so hot. The same problem we had with that is, again, it did recover stuff. The percentages were still pretty low. So that, and the main part of both of these were, these were scientists that were, in theory, really good at some of the theory, but then they said, okay, we're just going to bring this up to the surface and recover it with any of the standard spill pieces of equipment. Well, that's not straightforward either, because once it comes up to the surface, which one are you using? Are you using a weir skimmer, using a brush skimmer? What do you have to have there? Where are you going to store it? So you still have a bunch of issues. So all this is replacing or redistributing where the oil is. But again, if you want to get out of the water column, these are some possibilities. But again, neither of these are commercially available. So again, mentioned others with netting. Again, there's a company that originally called Dunderboom, now called Macworth Aquatic Environment, have a system on paper that they've used mostly for silk fences and stuff that anchors to the bottom and then has a float on top. One of the big questions that we've had is there's a lot of different kind of silk material. What works better with oil? What works better with the silk? Can you get the combination of enough of a pass-through with water that you can't? During deep water, one of the companies came through with a parachute skimmer. Basically, all this is something that somebody had built to use to clean pools with. That you, rather than having to reach out into a big pool, you actually just pull it through the water like a parachute and collect it. So again, the question is, what do you have on there? I don't know if Jacqui had mentioned before, but there are some data of using nets at there's the SAIC actually used to run a test tank for the Environment Canada. I don't know how well you can see, and if not, we can get you some better pictures. Try different mesh sizes, try different oils, and at some point in time, the oil doesn't stay there. It goes right through. So again, and also we're going to capture all your animals as well. So again, if you're going to do this, you might have to think about the current, especially if it's inland. Just to remind you, if you are using a boom, you normally make sure that the current perpendicular to the boom is reduced. What we've never tried with this is if you angle this and keep it at a correct angle and still use netting, maybe the water will go through, maybe the oil will stay. Think upon the stickiness of the oil and get the viscosity of the oil. Not very straightforward. The last two things I'll mention is there was another, for those who don't know, another bitumen-based fuel that came from South America back in the 70s, early 80s that they actually briefly, they might have actually very briefly imported to Florida, but then it went away. It was actually, rather than adding the light ends to it, they have to pump it, they actually added a little fresh water and a little bit of surfactant. Problem is, as soon as it hit the water, it just stayed in the water column. It was perfectly, almost neutrally buoyant. They actually designed a refloating system. Basically, get energy to help bring it up again and grab it again. The test looked good if you're in a very confined space, so you would have to still try to figure out a way to get that oil to an area that is very quiescent and doesn't have a lot of mixing. Then maybe if you're going to mixing things up, you may be able to bring something to the surface. Again, not real straightforward. Again, that system was never deployed on a spill, but it was deployed in experiments. And the other one with University of New Hampshire has a circular flume, and they've started to do some work on, I think Jacqui mentioned about the efficacy of sorbents. This is initial data. Don't quote me completely on this, but the biggest factor is temperature. For both how much it absorbs or how much it detaches. So they did two experiments. One is trying to drive the oil through the sorbent, see how it did. The second one is attach the sorbent oil to the sorbent and then run the current, see what would take to detach. Again, the higher temperatures, more problematic. Actually, as the temperatures increase, the less oil will be sorbed. But actually, the chunkier, heavier stuff desorb quicker. I just got this late last week because I had to move this around. So there's still, again, the preliminary stage, trying to figure out when you're dragging this through or putting this through the water, is it really catching or not? So, the data gaps. Finding the droplets. Or are they? Are they entrained with or without air, or is there soap with them too? Again, you don't have, if you have both of those, you're going to have any process you have for recovery, you're going to have to handle that all with some kind of fancy decanting system. You're going to have to treat the silt, the water, the oil all separately. Handling dissolved, lack of mitigation. So a lot of the approaches that we've seen so far aren't very practical. Again, you're trying to bring stuff to the surface and then you're still having the same problem there. Efficacy of sorbents. And then the last thing is how to test this stuff full scale. Again, there's art blooms out there like up in Halifax and a couple other places that you may be able to start looking at the efficacy of some of these things. But now we're talking about possibly trying to stop a creek or a partial part of the river just to try to keep the stuff in the water column from going past. So the key is be able to, just as you would do any water on the surface in a river, pick your good spots, pick your natural collection points, and then try to figure out if you can handle it there. My boss told me I had to put it on at Jupiter. That's it.
That puts a natural follow-on to for my talk, which is about trying to ways to for contain oil that's moving along the bottom. Because in most environments, if it was go to the bottom and sit there, we wouldn't really care. Like the Tanzania was great. They spent like 13 months vacuuming oil out of that site because there was no transport. So that's the easy part. But it turns out, unfortunately, in most systems, there's some potential migration. So we're trying to do containment, protection of oil moving along the bottom of the water column. The tools, the list of the tools in the toolbox is getting smaller. We need a smaller toolbox for this process because the only thing that we have are some kind of bottom curtain, where it's a half bottom curtain, surface flotation, bottom filter fence, full height curtain, a berm, on the bottom. You can enhance natural collection areas, or you can create a collection area. These are all things that people have talked about, discussed during spills. The biggest thing, just like oil moving along the water surface, oil moving along the bottom, you don't have to worry about the effect currents on any kind of containment system that you're trying to do. You want to contain and then recover, hopefully very closely. In the next talk is more about the recovery part, but there's no containment without connection to recovery, just otherwise time is tension. And then also, if you don't have any natural collection points in the river, then and it's moving in the water column, I just wait until you find some place to accumulate. There's a river. The best area for containment and recovery was the end of the lakes. There were 3 impoundments along the 30 miles of that river. And then sort of, the deployment relative to the timing of sunken oil movement. Again, the DDL 152, where, we found it, started recovering, then it moved, and then, you want to be able to sort of put your containment system in there before it moves again. You find it again, and then you find the containment system. So these are the kind of bottom half curtains kind of thing. They can be either with flotation. The one on the left has a little flotating pattern. So there's a gap in here because you're trying to minimize stress or pressure on water flow and steering the containment system. And then you attach to the shoreline. These are systems that were developed. Actually, some of them were built and deployed during the Kalamazoo River. They tried lots of things. They had 3 years of response in trying to do it. You can sort of see there's a curtain here, and of course what happens is if there's any kind of current, what do you think happens to that containment? It's scouring. Big fails pretty quickly with any kind of current, and then of course you can put it at an angle. The rules of thumb are same thing as for floating boom, or anything more than about a knot that you start getting out. So this is a system that that I'm part of a team that has a contract with the Coast Guard R&D Center, and so we have tried to learn from all the efforts done at Enbridge and other places. We designed another kind of containment system here. It's kind of similar. This one doesn't have any surface flotation except in here because we decided we don't need all that extra stress of a flotation that's going to also have a source of failure from currents. But in this case, we put little scour aprons out front. They've got stiffeners in them. We kind of try to design that. And we're looking at different kind of materials. We're trying to get oleophilic materials that are permeable where they a little bit pass the water, and so that maybe they would not fail to. And then that's for a riverine system. We also have a design for an open water, like a Great Lakes or an offshore one, where we're just trying to sort of, obviously the oil theoretically would potentially move in one direction, not in any direction. So you would put this. This is a different design kind barrier. We're trying to not make it permeable, but we don't think there'll be much current. But you can sort of see here that you're, imagine how challenging it would be to put something like this in the water. First, you got to find the oil, and you got to figure out what direction it might move in, and then you put this in the divers or not, and then hope that the oil went in the right direction. Advantages and considerations, we've changed our tune here, and so the bottom half curtain, partial height limits the environmental loading on it. You don't want to put anything in the entire water column. You can monitor because you've got the flotations, you can sort of see where it's failing. If you put it at the right angle, you might be able to test it to an area that you can then recover. So containment's got to be closely coupled with recovery. But you can only put it in some of the water depth, you can have curtain water columns, and most people weather systems require a lot of anchorage and difficult to install. The bottom is not uniform. You're trying to put this in a way that has good seal at the bottom because you're trying to contain sunken oil, including oil. So another technique is for containment is again another end bridge. These pictures from end bridge here. These essentially are dog babies, and and so they did a bunch of times. Two things though. They kind of developed this easy way to put the absorbent material on this frame that you can lift out and put another one in. A lot easier, a lot less maintenance in terms of trying to do it the other way. And they found that these loop absorbents are much more effective than the oil. Out the pom-poms that have the cut-off ends, but if they're looped, they are much higher effectiveness. In fact, I think the work they've done at UNH also showed they had higher recovery from loop. But here, you're kind of these are in shallow water, so they're filtered the entire water column, so you get oil moving on the bottom and in the water column. But you could put them in deeper. Some kind of containment, a little bit of recovery of oil that might be moving close to the bottom surface. These things. So happens is here's a diagram. They're a little more forgiving in terms of bottom that kind of thing. We've got very critical materials. You get water column droplets as well as oil on the bottom. You put them in any depth you want, kind of, but the currents are strong. They get scoured just like anything else right underneath them. And if you have a high flow event, it becomes a big pile of mess. And so, it's really not a very effective standalone barrier. You always do multiple things. This might be fit under slow conditions if you're trying. And I think Kurt talked a little bit about the full height curtain. These we made different materials, but we can talk about the low flow conditions. I think it's only effective low flow areas where the curtain can maintain contact with the bottom, where the risk of oil remobilization is also low. So sometimes people talk about putting these curtains around areas during recovery operations so that in case there's any oil that's suspended, that you might be able to contain that. So I'm not real big on berms. People talk about, you can create one mechanically by excavating sediment, creating a berm that might be around where the oil is, or you could put sediment filled fabric bags, kind of things there, kind of create a low level material. But a lot of the oil that you saw, if it has developed to low viscosity, just a little bit of current will pick it up and just flow right in. So now you have to get a permit to dredge a hole in the river or a water body, and so I could do something like this. Maybe you're trying to enhance. We've got oil moving down into the impoundment area. If you want to increase the efficacy, you might be able to do something like that. But this is not something you do in day 1, 2, or 3. It's later on. Probably don't even know enough about the oil at that point in time. Trenching, downstream compression, that's another thing that you could do as the river enters in the town. But you can do soft sediments, you can disturb habitat, activated sediment, maybe water exposed. This kind of thing won't happen over an vegetation like this. Again, the idea is contain oil entering a small impoundment of rivers. That might be work. In fact, during the Enbridge bill, they talk about doing that, dredging where the river enters the lake. But what you can do is you can enhance natural accumulation. Again, the Enbridge is kind of like the poster child for all these kind of techniques. But There was 1 million gallons of dilbit, and they estimated, I think, they looked, I think only about 50,000 gallons actually along the 40 kilometers of the river, but remember that oil is not safe because it was heavier than water. It's the sediment. That oil sediment particulate, agglomeration sank in low flow areas. When you, as you saw, the polling, when you disturb the sediment, the oil reflowed again. So if that oil had sunk with the concentrations, they took samples and did toxicity testing, year 2 and 3, all the sediment samples were non-toxic. And they had very low concentrations. There's a lot of legacy contaminants. So these rivers have a lot of gauges from lots of other kinds of activities not related to oil. But if the oil had sunk, that would have been the best thing. But darn stuff kept reflowing. And so, this is a river, people would buy it, and we couldn't have hot machines on the river for a long time. So one approach they developed, again, USGS did a lot of modeling, and they looked for areas where there were natural accumulation along rivers. Here's a little side channel here. And so the idea was to try to enhance the accumulation of oil and sediments in those side channels. So all these little red dots, we call them sediment traps. So if we identify the ran model and say, okay, well, this was during certain water flow levels, they would all water would flow in the suspended and the sediments would flow in there as well. And we enhanced them with the waterway. Putting here, they used tree poi logs, tree branches to try to sort of slow down the flow, divert the flow into these areas where they would settle out. And after that worked out pretty well. Several of these things, they dredged them out for several times a year as a way to try to reduce the amount of oil that's constantly being changed. And natural collection areas, built on these natural processes, and we didn't have to remove the trees or the poi logs afterwards. So all the reflows can be covered by standard techniques. Doesn't interfere with navigation. Something that's important. But obviously, you can only do it if you have areas of natural accumulation. And then they had to dredge when they dredged these oil materials out of that, they had a lot of waste. Very complicated. We really needed to understand the sort of hydrodynamics of the river. Like I said, in USGS, we spent millions developing fine-tuning models years later. Okay, trenching to create a depression down current. That's a really hard thing. But never say never, right? Might be perfectly for that. So the data gaps are the fact that there's nothing off the shelf. You can't go buy any of these things yet. The bathymetry is a really complex way to effectively deploy these kind of systems. Well, under what conditions they might mobilize, and when you're trying to contain spreading, and understand enough. Chris has already told you about how these oils can be mobilized under wave and current conditions, and then sometimes just temperature. And in fact, it was really interesting because in the Enbridge bill, there's a process called gas deposition. Essentially, it's the biogenic gases, things decompose, and then little methane bubbles come up, and then you bring the oil to the surface by that mechanism. And it doesn't have to be just oil releasing from sediment on its own. And then, we're working with the team to test that inland and offshore treatment systems. We're just going to splash these things next spring. That one of them, the river one, we're going to put in the river. How that compares. Hopefully, there's still more oil there. So that's the sort of containment of oil moving along the bottom. Next time I'll talk about it. Removal is a little bit better. The paint is kind of tough. It's hard to contain oil floating on the surface where you can see it. And more techniques that have been proven on the bottom. So, sunken oil removal and data capture. And this is builds on the work we did at that API sunken oil technical report. And same cast of characters. So what do we have? What's in our toolbox? Dredge, suction dredge, drive-directed pumping, vacuuming, mechanical removal, resource, trawls and nets, manual removal, and agitation. Those are all the things that we think that you can get oil off the bottom. And we're talking about mostly about bulk oil, not that's the focus. If there's oil, bulk oil, that we need to get off the bottom. Dredge. There's pretty common piece of equipment. They're transportable. You can bring them on scene. There's little no modifications. You can cover areas pretty quickly. You can pump for long distances with booster pumps on systems. How do you pass large solids like rock and debris? They're adjustable. They're pretty good now in terms of the depth of cut. They're not so crude anymore. You can keep track of what they've done by GPS, and they can operate from boat or from the shore, and up to 40 feet. And just this is no considerations. You make a lot of waste material, a lot of water and sediment, and oftentimes not much of it. Obviously, you can't work with any kind of seeds. Jim, you've never run these things, anything.
No, it's all.
You don't know what you're picking up. When especially these have a high pump rate, if the oil was a layer, man, it's all mixed up. And obviously, it doesn't work with good areas of pipeline or cables and things like that. So here's the creates a lot of material to be handled. So these geotubes again to count as a river. The size of them. This is they set up this whole system to separate. It's a lot of money, a lot of waste. Then all the water had to be treated and sent off to the waste treatment plant. You can't oil your water back into the river, right? Directed pumper, that's a little bit more, surgical. You have theoretically, if you have good visibility or good feel, you can have a diver direct either a vacuum or a physical pumping system. Mark Plain is a big pump guy, so he's got a lot of opinions about what kind of pumping system to use. But the biggest problem is that you have to have divers in contaminated water environment, and you still have a lot of waste. So, especially if the oil is kind of viscous and it's kind of hard to get. Water and sediment have very low viscosity. Viscous oils, it's kind of hard to get the oil and not all the water. Here's other mechanical pumping. I wanted to show you what we call the yellow submarine. There's a group, Dave Usher, who's built one of these, never been used. It's got a ROV with a pump on it.
Yeah.
All kinds of stuff. I always wonder how they keep the oil off that big bubble. little dispersant squirter on it. But another one is depending on the oil type, mechanical removal and excavate. That works pretty well depending on the oil type. You can put them on barges. You can use the amphibious ones. You can just ride them in shallow water. Now they can only go about 20 feet deep. It's kind of hard to be selective. If the oil is really viscous, you put a screen on it and you just let the water and sediment find that it drain through. A lot of that's going to be water rising, but it's a pretty small bite. So most of the time that when we've had sunken oil, when we look at physical mechanical removal, we're talking about something with a clamshell dredge, an environmental clamshell dredge, so that we can prevent the leakage of the oil if we bring materials from the bottom through the water column and then out of the water and into the tank. This is one of the ledges from the Apex 3508, which was in the Mississippi River. You've seen many pictures of that. We're trying to show the most recent case study. And that worked really well. You can work from shore, you can work from vessel or barge. It's pretty friendly to debris, as long as you can get it shut tight. You can track progress with georeference data pretty amazing. It is pretty cool. But what the biggest problem is they're not very many of them. Jim, you asked where was the nearest one here on the West Coast?
Yeah, so there's one in Long Beach.
Oh, good. There's one in Moscow.
So it's really cool.
Okay, so not too many. I'm during the Apex 3508. We had to wait 10 days for when it showed up.
Yeah, it's Kurt Maritime has one. It took a while.
It's a long time.
And there's, but I don't know if they have the clam vision.
Yeah. Okay. So let me just kind of show you. So here's what it looks like. It's a pretty simple little bucket kind of thing, you know. It's got these flaps on it that it's water drain out. You try to contain all the fluid when you put it in. And so here's, you know, for mechanical removal of oil on the freeboard, on the water bottom of the river, that's a lot of oil.
Yeah.
I was impressed. This guy just put you right before he fell in. Thing about it, they have this software, they call it fan vision. So every one of these things is a bite. And you can keep track of where you've been and position it so that you do that. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Do that?
Yeah.
Huh? Every
Yeah.
bite. Yeah. So they, you know, we had, using the side scan sonar, we had designated an area for removal, and you know, they were doing a really good job here. This is not a cartoon, this is real. These are real data from the TAC. Pretty amazing. Turbines, we can, you know, drag them on the bottom. You know, the V-Source were first designed as a oil recovery system. That's what the ORS used to. And so, you know, you can pick up some oil. It's not really effective. I think of it as being, you know, as a good type of traveling, you know, for low amounts of oil. It might be a polishing step. Sometimes it could be a T-lift endpoint measure. If we're going to remove as much oil, then we're going to drag the V-Source through there. And if we don't get any oil stuff to them, then, you know, we're done. So it could be a way to pick up patchy oil, or last look at the trace, you know, like that. All amounts of oil. Which is big leak. They're one-time use. I haven't seen a single net that people have tried that because, you know, if you make it the mesh too small, then, you know, they don't. The current's too strong, it just fail. If you make it a little bit bigger, then the oil fail. But people talk about it. Longer list over here, right? You can tell. You see a long list on this side. Manual removal if the water shallow enough or you have waiting depth. There are cases like that. You can have manual removal. These guys are doing wrong. I think it's one of the left. I think both of these are methods. Your divers, when you get oil that's kind of in flawed, which you can use lift bags and then you can get it off the bottom now. Obviously, it's pretty slow. What's wrong with this picture, Jim? This guy's doing this.
Do they have gloves?
No PPE, and he's you know, he's got a scuba, not a self-contained. In fact, I wonder if he didn't have scuba. I wonder if he had just snorkel on like that.
Some of it was shallow.
Yeah. So, you know, it's that for certain conditions, if it's near shore, and a lot of things that we talk about don't work in near shore environments. Or if the oil's kind of patchy, or if you want to be, you know, in this case, if the oil's, you know, in very specific blobs, you could have agitation reflow. This is the technique that was done again in Bridgeville. They tried all kinds of ways. You can't reconstruct it. Remember that oil would float with one separated from the sediment at the bottom. And you have pumps and brakes, and they have stingers, there's a spray bar. There's like 7 or 8 different versions of things that they need to do that. So what they did was finally, I think it was about year 2 of the response, they actually designed, they put together a scientific support team to come in and advise the EPA of FOSC. We did some experiments to figure out how much oil would actually flow to the surface versus kind of got suspended in the water column and just went back down again. Very good. Then what happens is when you disturb the bottom of this kind of thing, what are you doing? And it's mixing the oil now into the depth at which you're trying, you know, you're agitating. Right? So instead of just being the layer on the surface, now it's all mixed down, however, the depth of the agitation. And so if you read the FOSC report, in fact, if you're interested in sunken oil, this kind of, especially Dilbit, the FOSC desk study is an excellent source. And it has a lot of details. And in there, they say at the very end, they said, you know, you really need to do some characterization analysis to make sure that this is an effective agitation reflow. You've got to make sure that you are reflowing a significant amount of the oil before you can do this. But, you know, they had that oil over 40 kilometers of river and most of it in between ponds. Okay, so once you you're recovering the oil, if you just recovered oil, it'd be hard enough, but you are recovering oil, water, and sediment. So you need some kind of decanting system. Especially this particularly challenging because sometimes the oil that you're recovering floats, some of it sinks, some of it, does all both. And that's the spin. So you have to be flexible in terms of, where your oil is going, whether it's to the bottom or to the top. And most of the time, so these are real pictures from responses of sunken oil. I like this one the best. This is an inner tube with a little bit of a chicken screen or something there. And in Puerto Rico, it was abandoned swimming pool. And in fact, in this case, remember, I think George, you showed a picture of the oil, the oil, but when it got low viscosity, the sand settled through it and the oil separated. And so here, this swimming pool picture here, all the turbulence in the pumping system, they pumped all the material that they use in the little vac systems, oil floated. So that black stuff on the surface is the oil, very little bit. It was a floating oil. It just had Jared Galt would say it had a rock on it. So, there are a lot of systems designed for, oil and wastewater treatment that are kind of like refinery oriented. Companies are buying these things, but the challenges are the types of oil and the waste stream that you're trying to treat is unique. A lot of times you can tweak these things to get the effluent from the refinery to get it work because you've got a relatively consistent wastewater stream and you have a very inconsistent wastewater stream. It's poorly characterized. Really well. And a lot of times, especially when you're using offshore, during the DBL 152, the plan was all that water and oil that was pumped off the bottom by the divers. We had a big barge and it was supposed to be, we were going to let it just settle on the barge. You can't water 40 miles offshore. Do that. But we could never get any decanting because there was too much ocean on the ocean, right? And so we had to bring the barges into the land and bump them off to on land treatment. So obviously, when you're pumping things, the hardest part is you want to have some really good nozzles that can minimize water and sediment intake and maximize oil intake, so that we have less waste streams to treat. So I think we kind of know what we can do there. The options are there's enough range of them. So it's really mostly management of a waste stream, either minimizing the amount of water or figuring out how to treat it so that we don't have to then slow down the operations. And then really one of the data gaps in business, what kind of endpoints? When are we have we removed enough of the oil to meet the objective response? Then your treatment points is it's hard enough for spills in the intertidal zone on the bottom. And when you're making episodic releases, particularly because you can get all the oil off now, and then there'll be remobilization from other places. And then one thing about non-floating oil spills, especially non oil tank, is that there's probably a multi-year, maybe not multi-year response, but a multi-year assessment to make sure that there's nothing being remobilized that needs to be addressed season.
Good afternoon. I'm Jim Elliott, currently with T&T Salvage, and I'm covering two of the discussions. Mixer. And so I have a little bit extra time, so I'm going to share something with you that I've learned over the years. You won't remember anything else I talk about except for this lesson. So I used to be like 7 foot tall. I had a full head of hair, and I was like this after these types of responses because they're frustrating, painful. But being in the salvage industry and the Coast Guard, I retired from Coast Guard. I always met people on their worst day, right? Ships blowing up, some fire, people are unhappy, So what I found is the orange lifesaver solves a lot of these problems. Now what you do is you say, would you like a mint? And it can't be spearmint, it can't be peppermint. It has to be the orange lifesaver. And so when somebody's really upset, they're frustrated, they're angry, they put it in their mouth, and then they just stop because they're thinking, and so it refocuses them, and then you can calm them down. And I want to let you know that I've tried this for the last 30 years. It works. So, and it works even interpersonally. Like my daughter's 18, my wife is, they're going at it all the time. So I just like throw lifesavers in the room and walk out. So, all right. My discussion is non-pollutant detection recovery. We've been talking about it all day. I think we want to be talking about challenges. It's all a challenge when you're doing this type of stuff. So to kind of put things in perspective, I think is that National Research Council says that for surface oil of a water oil spill, what's the anticipated recovery rate? Anybody know?
Maybe it's 20.
10 to 25%, I think is right. Right. So when I think about that, again, I think about my children. They come to me and say, "Well, I got a 40% on this test." Wrong answer, right? Like, so how do you tell the American public, you tell the public, or anybody? Well, we did really well. We got 35%. Think about non-floating. I'm with the American Salvage Association. So this is the technological complexity of taking lengthy industrial style work underwater will require vastly different collection experts, equipment, and operation plans than those commonly used for oil spill studies. So again, I'm biased. Hydraulic submersible pumps, divers, cranes, heavy lifting, all that is in the world of work of salvers. So my company, we do both. We do oil spill removal organization stuff, and we do salvage. So I thought this is a perfect stuff. And we went through this process with the Coast Guard. So the speaker that is here, Mark, he was going to talk about the regulations. So Coast Guard regulations 33 CFR is for facilities and vessels, 154 and 155. And in 2016, they came out, this is a Marine Safety Information Bulletin. Anybody read this? Excellent. I like this. It says the Coast Guard created the non-polluting oil application procedures to meticulously and qualitatively assess non-polluting oil classifications. What does that mean? I don't know what that means. Meticulously and qualitatively. All right. Initially, they said by November 30th of last year. Now they extended it to July 1st of this year, so it's effective. All previous Group 5 OSROs will be removed, and you have a company that wants to do this has to apply to become a non-polluting oil classified OSRO. I think there's currently 11 companies have gone through this, 6 are in California. That's the notes that I have. What's interesting from I've gone through this process, and I wrote a concept of operation, we went through it, and we got qualified, is it, I don't know, there's really no, they give you a list, and I'm going to go through line by line the list of what you have to do and how we did it, and we can talk about different ways to do it. But I think that even a company that had a John boat and a fish finder with some sort of pads that they could drop on the bottom may be qualified. I don't know, because the range is pretty broad. My philosophy was, I'm this kind of guy. I'm going to do every checklist. I'm going to try to address everything. So we'll talk about that. So here's the process. This is Coast Guard's visual. There's a non-floating oil classification. You go through the process. You see the concept of operation. You get temporarily approved, and then they come out and they audit you, and they look over your equipment. Person who looks at your equipment, have they ever done this before? Probably. Okay. So then you get, this is our temporary letter. I was really excited to get that. And then we had an audit. We got the approval letter. Jacqui's talked about this. What's kind of cool is I was on this work group that we did the API study. If you haven't read it, it's really great. We get no commissions from this publication.
Our name is not even on it.
Our name's not even on it. But it has a lot of cool checklists and all this, for example, I'll talk about diving, there's a checklist for diving, there's a checklist for everything. So it kind of, if you're ever thrown into this kind of situation, you have to come up with a solution and narrow it down. We kind of went to the red, amber, green risk assessment. what's worked in the past. So it's a lot of experience from a lot of case studies we talked about before all come together. So out of that, they said detection capabilities. We want sonars, cameras, diver observation, towed stationary surveillance, laser, telemetry, visual, bottom sample, water sample. This is a list from Recipient Commission Board. So sonar systems, we have side scan, which is used effectively, as Jacqui said. The technology continues to improve. So, for example, this was a snapshot that we did last year. It's going to continue to mature. Multi-beam, a single beam for going below the bottom sediment, right? So we have systems that can go in the water column, on the bottom, below the bottom surface. Multi-beam, so if you want to do the bottom contours of the bottom river systems, wherever the oil you think is going to collect, because so gravity is the prime mover in the universe. So they all, hopefully if it's a little heavier, it's going to go down to those depressions. Tell you a quick story, kind of funny story from DBL 152. I was on that. I was on the strike team at the time. And NOAA decided the endpoint was it become the marginal benefit of continuing to risk divers' lives and everything to go into recover the diminish amount of oil was not worth it. So we came to this endpoint plan. And the state of Texas was on the line. You know, I think political response is really an exercise in civil society, more so than technically. That's just my opinion. Anyway, so they said, their argument was, look, the Gulf of Mexico is a bowl. This oil is heavier water, so the oil will ultimately bounce on. It'll never come to shore. And there was a guy on the line named JT, that's a big Gulf place in Texas. He said, why do seashells come ashore then? Anyway, so you have to address those types of issues when you're doing OSPR.
What's the answer?
What is the answer? There's another joke. The thermos. Have you ever heard the joke of the hillbilly in the thermos? It keeps hot things hot and cold things cold.
The smartest.
How do it know? I'll be practicing. So the Ecoscope is a pretty cool tool. It's a 3D modeling system, real time. So even amateurs like me can go out and find a shipwreck, and you can even detect oil with it or something. Basically, Doppler profile in water column. So again, the technology continues to improve. The lesson from this, from my lessons in this, is that all these types of systems, there's not one system you can use for that. You need multiple systems. You need a multi-beam, side scan, single beam, you need a package, right? So Jacqui said there's not like one kit we can go pull off the shelf and do underwater oil. Underwater visualizations, what can you use? You use ROVs, divers. This is a screenshot from using a video array detecting a condo oil from deepwater horizon. So we were a part of that, going out and finding something oil. Absolutely. Jacqui showed the system, NPC system that Dave Usher created. We're working with a company called OceanGate out of Seattle. They have a 1 atmosphere submerged. You can go down and you can do underwater visualization, and then you have to pay for that afterward because you have to decoy things. But they have the sonar on that. Diver observations. This is my forte. But worked as a diver in the Coast Guard, and I'm a commercial diver. And so the lesson here is that there's a checklist in the guide. If you're ever overseeing this kind of stuff, is that the diver needs to be protected. OSHA requirements, HAZWAPER requirements apply to divers also, right? So you want to protect them from the contaminant. You want to have a decon process, and you want to have people on the surface that are trained up to that level too. Okay? So it's about worker safety, diver safety. We talked about that. That's one of the methodologies, which is rudimentary and pretty easy to put together last minute. Visual observations, so not only below surface, but above surface. We use drones with infrared and other systems, X-band radar on the surface planes. Recovery capabilities. So this is the list that comes from the Coast Guard requirements. The suction dredge, dive directed, mechanical, all those guys. So there's like a playbook. So I went by the playbook. So the suction dredge, Jacqui just showed a few photos of that. We actually built our own shallow water dredging system that's been used a few times. The issue with dredges, again, is the volume of water you can take up. So Great Lakes, they don't allow decanting. State of California, decanting allowed? Sometimes. State of Washington, I understand within the first 24 hours, everything's fine. And then you have to get permitted, right? You have to go through a process. So think about, I would say if you're in a contingency plans, think about decanting and what are you going to do? How are you going to dispose of all this waste? It's a big issue. It can be a limiting factor. This was a diver directed pumping system used on the Athos 1 in the Delaware River that we talked about. We had a small pocket of submerged oil, and the diver would direct the hydraulic submerged pump. It would go up into a series of decanting tanks, and then the propulsion unit, basically a drum with some sorbent material in it, go to the side.
Inside a boomed area, right?
Inside of the boomed area. Now, there was 3 states, funny story from this response, 3 states. I was on the Coast Guard strike team, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware. And I said, look, I'm a strike team, I've been doing this for years, I'll tell you if there's a sheet in the water. No, we had three state reps on the end of the barge. It was cold, it was like December. Delaware River, standing there to see if there was a sheet, so that this system was working. So, I'll tell my other funny story for this. The cat in the court, when they came in, I was a strike team guy, and he said, hey, can we do this? And I looked at the situation, I said, yeah, but it's going to be sloppy and expensive. He said, look, don't ever say that again. So there's no, don't ever say this is sloppy and expensive. The divers, here's my shot from the Morris J. Berman.
I was there.
You were there? What I recommend not doing with divers, using them as sorbent pads. So this is a scuba diver, right?
Excellent.
Lucky. Or not.
No, I was doing that.
Environmental clamshell. We did the response to the Apex barge in the Mississippi River, and it was a pretty effective. Again, when you talk about effectiveness, when you think about environmental conditions and the characteristics, it's going to be different in response. But this worked well, and this morning I made several calls, and I understand there's one of these systems in Long Beach, so there's the process. So it has a cool software. Sorbents, we talked about those. Containments, so the company responded to the Enbridge spill. Kalamazoo River. These are different types. And I think we talked about the curtains, we talked about those, sediment curtains, and then a lot of it was experimental, trying to figure out. So you learn something on every response, but this is one of the big issues. It's actually how to contain. So when we did this study, I remember Jacqui saying, yeah, there's no way. Now she's going out and experimenting with that system. So one of the things, section 7, I think, of our API guide addresses wastewater treatment. And it's, again, it's something a lot of people don't think about. So when people think about all these skimmers, so great. So where are you going to put everything that you pick up? We did a job in Lake Erie on a sunken barge. We had a high benzene carbon. We actually had to build our own recovery system with frac tanks. We had to have a vapor recovery system and then a nitrogen generator on board because of the type of carbon. Air pollution concerns, storage concerns, And then there's different systems. We have a system which is an electrocoagulation unit. They treat, it's for treating waste, treating water, making drinking water. And it can be used for different types of contaminants. The issue with all of these wastewater treatment systems that I found when I did my research for this is that you need a continuous waste stream. So and you're not going to have that in this. You're going to get a slug of oil, and then you won't have anything for a while. It's the same, and it really, based on my research, you may do differently, but I haven't found a system that's going to work effectively for an offshore temp conditioner, non-continuous waste stream. So one of the things in the Coast Guard requirement is moving equipment. You have to be there within how many hours? 24 hours, right? 24 hours. So how do you move equipment and personnel? And I would say salvage industry, we're under the gun in the U.S. for meeting timeframes for response. And so we have a good logistical supply chain, and we have equipment pre-positioned around the U.S. So this is something to think about: is where's your highest risk? How will you get equipment there and personnel there? So, we have equipment all around. Another thing that they ask for is you have to be able to operate in every type of environmental condition. So I had, in my concept of operation, is okay, we can work in ice conditions, we work to the equator, but that's an issue. There's no depth limitation, right? So in the salvage regulations, it says you need to hot tap a ship to 150 feet for vessels operating over 40 feet. It's very specific on depth. In the OSPR classification, there's no depth limitation. So again, I searched the world, and I found a company in Scotland that set the deep water recovery record. And I'm like, okay, we're going to. And then you decide if you want to recover, right? The lesson, here's, besides the lifesaver lesson that you'll carry with you for the rest of your life, is don't let the oil get out of the ship. Right? I know it sounds basic, but a lot of times in our industry, and when there's a marine casualty, is people are in denial. They work with contracts, all these types of things, and ultimately the prestige. Right? Broken half. Right? So the idea is lighter the ship immediately. So what if it sinks? Well, there's systems, there's hot tap systems used by divers, and then there's remotely operated hot tapping systems. This is a Pramo system. They can tap into a hull and pump out oil. This is another system from Deep Tech, a company we work with. It looks a little scarier, but it's been proven to pump out oil. So there's your question. So they actually remove the oil at depth using a shuttling system with remotely operated vehicles. One final thought, again, in my advertisement for sunken wrecks. There's a lot of sunken wrecks around the U.S. that may contain oil. There's a NOAA study, remediation of underwater wrecks and environmental threats. A lot of them identified. There's been a risk assessment, and some of them are still in use. And there's a few still off the state of California. Let's go to the picture. All right. Thank you.
We are up for a 10-minute break if people want to take a break. Otherwise, we can. Greg, do you need a minute to kind of set up for the
Up to
discussion? What do people want? Break?
break.
10-minute break.
Yeah, like, short. Stand up here and sort of.